An immediate thing we see here coming from artificial intelligence, and it can do a passable job writing a term paper. We can stop that here. We have an honor code, and most kids won't do it, almost all. And if they do, it's not too, eventually it'll be indistinguishable, I'm told.
Oh, yes. But it's there already.
But, oral exams. But here's what I'm worried about. This is the chairman of Microsoft, who I used to think was a pretty good guy. He proclaims, well, it's not going to write your final, it's going to write your draft. But writing your draft, that's where you do most of the learning. That's where you read all the stuff that surrounds your subject and decide what's relevant.
Yeah.
And that means that, and it goes back to something you've taught me, and that is, if you can't write a draft of a paper or write your own paper, you become a cripple.
Well, that's the fundamental issue in the argument. It's because you could say, well, why not just if your point is the degree, why not just let AI write your paper and hand it in and get your A? And it's simple. It's really quite simple. I think it was Alfred North Whitehead who said this, a very, very wise thing. You think so that your thoughts can die instead of you. Okay, now this is biologically true. This is what makes human beings different from all other creatures. Right? Maybe this is the spark of God in some sense tied to the biology. So the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that generates abstractions, grew out of the motor cortex, which is the part of the brain that enables you to voluntarily sequence your actions. So what thought is the space in which you create avatars of action. Right? So what a thought, we think, because we're materialist atheists, and we think we're scientists, we think that a thought is a description of the objective nature of the world. And that isn't what a thought is. A thought is a microcosmic avatar of you. That's what a thought is. And if it's a stupid thought, then you could act it out. You could embody that avatar and then it would become you. But if it's a faulty avatar and you act it out, then you'll die. Or worse, because there are worse things than dying, you'll end up in something like hell. And so, why think? So that you can generate virtual selves? Then why think critically? So you can kill off the idiot virtual selves before you enact them. Why do that? So you don't die or end up in hell. That's why. So why should you think? So you don't die and end up in hell. How do you learn to think? Well, not by having AI write your damn papers. The reason you're learning to write is because there's no difference between writing and thinking. And the reason you're learning to think is so that you don't, not only so that you don't fall into a pit, but so that you don't pull everyone you love kicking and screaming into the pit with you. And so you have cheat. Go ahead. See what happens. So what you do with a liberal arts education, which you do very well here, is you say, don't cheat because you'll put your immortal soul in danger. And people say, well, I don't believe in that. So that's like, go right ahead. Take your chances. You make the presumption that you can manipulate the world by lying and cheating. Go out there and enact that and watch what happens. We're having an argument about your culture, in our culture, about what's true. It's a deep argument. The scientists say, well, objective truth is true, but that's problematic because objective truth gives us no direction. And the postmodernists say, well, there's no overarching meta-narrative and everything is relative, and they do that to justify their hedonism. And the truth of the matter is, we don't know how to define what's real. And most of us are materialists. The material world is what's real. Here's a different proposition. What's real leads you away from hell. Now that's actually a definition, right? It's a proposition that your life will be conducted most fully if you abide by the dictum that what's real is what leads you away from hell. And you might say, well, why would you assume that hell is real? And I would say, if you were there, you'd think it was real. Right. So, and I don't really know what to make of that metaphysically. I mean, I believe it's true, and I've believed it for a very long time because I read a lot of literature about hell. And you think, well, hell isn't real. It's like, read about Unit 731. That was a Japanese medical unit in China. You read about Unit 731, and I would recommend, by the way, for those of you who are watching or listening, that you don't do this, because you'll regret it if you do. You read about Unit 731, and then come and tell me you don't believe hell is real. If you read enough about atrocity and totalitarian catastrophe, you will absolutely walk away from that thinking that hell is real. And then if you have any sense, you'll think, well, whatever I'm going to do in my life, I'm going to do whatever takes me as far away from that as I can possibly get. You know, when this political scandal blew up around me in Canada, people come up to me and they say this, they say, you're so brave. And I think, you don't understand. The difference between you and me is I know what to be properly afraid of, right? And I know that when the cat gets your tongue, you will end up in hell. You lose control of that logos, right? Because that's your capacity for voluntary speech, voluntary thought. You lose that link with the logos, you are headed for hell. And that is definitely worse than death.
Could you estimate how many hours have you spent in private therapeutic counseling?
I mean, doing counseling with people?
Doing counseling with people.
15,000 hours.
Yeah, see, that's 7.
Might be more than that.
7 full working years. And 8. But here's why I asked.
That's a conservative estimate.
That's why I asked the question was, when you talk, like academics who have a good education, which I fancy I do, are pretty good at understanding the implications of propositions. You know, like if you said that we're material beings, if we were purely material beings, of course we couldn't know it. Dogs don't know that they're dogs. But so we're good at things like that, right? You're good at describing the consequences as they appear in individuals. Mm-hmm. And it's very dramatic. Mm-hmm. And
this is one thing, you know, it's in many ways it's terrifying to be a therapist. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I mean, one of the things you learn if you're a therapist is that you really learn something about the intrinsic worth of people. Like some of the best people I met in my therapeutic practice, the best people morally were people who were on the surface. They had nothing going for them. Nothing worldly going for them. They weren't attractive. They weren't intelligent. They weren't accomplished. They weren't popular. In fact, they were often friendless. They often had devastated families. They had terrible developmental histories. They just had devastated lives, and yet there was still a core of ethical goodness to them that was stunning under the circumstances, miraculous. And so that really takes you aback to see that can happen, right? To see that essential nobility of the human spirit. And so that's a terrifying thing to see. And that goodness can shine through in places that just look dark and that no one is attending to. And the next thing you learn is don't impose your notions of someone's destiny on them. You do not know how that person's life should unfold. You're there to help them think that through. You are not there to give them advice. It's a theft. Giving someone advice, especially if you're a therapist, is theft because if they succeed, well, then it's your success. And it's corrupt theft because if they fail, they bear the consequences and you don't. So that's terrifying. And then the other thing I learned that was terrifying was I never saw anyone in my therapeutic practice ever get away with anything even once. Like, there's that old idea that God has a book and everything you do is written down. It's like, that's not just an idea. You get away with nothing. And of course it makes sense. It's like reality is real and you distort and bend it at your peril. And you may produce a rift temporarily, but that will snap closed on you. And you may not even notice the connection between your initial sin, failure to hit the target, and the consequences of that. But the consequences are inevitable. And it's even worse than that because not only are they inevitable, they tend to multiply. And so all of that, to the degree that I've been capable, has scared me straight, let's say. It's like, nope, I'm not going down that path. And you learn too, as a therapist, you learn the ancient truth that the truth is redemptive, right? And this is another of the great accomplishments of Freud, because Freud shed new light on the logos in some ways, right? Because Freud understood that true speech heals, right? I mean, that's his entire therapeutic approach is bring people in and don't disturb them when they're trying to tell you something. Let them say anything. Absolutely. And that's what he told his clients too, is like, say whatever comes to your mind, right? No matter how off color, off-putting, embarrassing, shameful, aggressive, sexual, find out who you are. That's the first draft. Lay yourself out on the table. And while he had them lay themselves out on the couch, he hid from his clients so they couldn't. He was afraid that if they saw his face, they would censor themselves by watching his emotional reactions. So he sat off to the side of his clients so they could just say what they had to say with no interference. And you know this because you're an educator, but people cannot organize themselves and come to who they are without laying themselves out. And they can't lay themselves out without thinking or talking. Most people think by talking. In fact, you learn to think by talking. You can't talk if no one listens. Most people have no one to listen to them.
Yeah. Education is a little bit different than therapy, but sometimes not. And one way it's different is now education is a common project that people share, and each has to do his part or he won't get any benefit from it. But better together, as you say. And so around here, we have a lot of psychological counseling here when we need it, but also the kids counsel each other. And that's a different thing because they're in the same boat. They're trying to get the same thing done. They want to understand the most important things. And that's a form of therapy, actually, when you think about it, because
well, actually, therapy is a form of that.
Yeah.
Right. Because, right. Yeah, sure. I mean, the therapeutic endeavor is dialogue, right? And it's, I guess, the advantage if you have a good therapist, which is very rare and becoming more and more difficult as it becomes illegal to be a good therapist, which it already is, by the way, because it's now illegal to tell your clients what you think. And so that's the end of that enterprise because that's all there was to it. So, but therapy is, it's dialogue in search of, it's dialogue. Look, it's a religious enterprise. It's motivated by love. What's our aim here? Therapeutic aim. To make things better. Why? Because we think it's a worthy enterprise to make things better. That's the proclamation of love, right? Love aims at making things better. Love aims at making the world more abundant. It aims at reducing unnecessary suffering, right? It's an ennobling enterprise, love. And so the therapeutic process aims at love and uses truth. And that's a religious enterprise. It's a logos enterprise. It's a dialogical enterprise. And it's a form of secularized religious practice.
So I have one last question. I know you're doing things. You go all over the world. You got friends and fans everywhere. You started some kind of organization. My last question is, how are you going to save the world?
One person at a time. Right? That's always how it's happened. You know, what's the leftist mantra? The long march through the institutions. Well, how do you combat that? With the longer march through the individuals. Right. The rest of it's an illusion in a way. There are individuals. Right. That's where the rubber hits the road. Individuals suffer. Individuals bear responsibility. Right. One of the gifts, I suppose, that the biblical corpus gave to the UK transformed into political wisdom and transmitted to the US, was the proposition that the individual is the proper unit of analysis, the fundamental unit of analysis. And I believe that that's the case, which is why I'm a psychologist, as I said, and not a sociologist or a political operative. It's the road. it's always been the case that the route to heaven and away from hell is the root of the individual soul. And I believe that it's theologically true, it's metaphysically true, it's philosophically true. I also believe that it's materially true, right? Insofar as that sort of truth can be instantiated materially. It's true at every level simultaneously.
In agreeing with that, I will say all of the greatest political philosophers, and all of the greatest statesmen thought precisely that. The purpose of the nation or the regime is the happiness of its people. And they come together to help make it, but each has to make his own. And I think that's a very beautiful way. That's how the founders of America organized the country. And my own view is beautiful things cannot abidingly lose their luster. And I will say that in our time, which is a desperate time, your success and influence is one of the key signs that I'm right about that. Thank you for being with me.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to be at Hillsdale and to see you.